our future lecture and welcome to Hamburg University of Technology. And we are very excited today to have a future lecture and inauguration lecture in one spot. And I'm also very delighted to moderate you through this evening. My name is Irina Zmanova. I'm Vice President for Research at this university. And I welcome everybody in this group, who are the colleagues, the students, or the friends of the Hamburg University of Technology. And I also welcome our guests online. There are around 50 people online right now, and since they are coming every second, so welcome also on that end of the computers. And we are here today because we have a very special future lecture with the title Ethics and Technology or Future of Morality. And this given is the frame of our future lectures and why we are doing it, why we are here today together. Future lecture is a format where we as a university community and the guests of our university come together to speak about the important topic which could be the future research topics which accompany our research and where we believe we can have further future joint efforts across the different disciplines and across the different schools. So what we would like to provide today is not only the knowledge of the facts, but especially to initiate the discussion, the lively discussions during our discussion panel today and also afterwards. And we hope that we trigger the new research ideas and new ideas for collaboration by this event. So today this lecture is organized by the Institute for Ethics and Technology, and I think this is the youngest institute in our university, which was given to Maximilian Kiener, our professor, who has started here around 1 year ago already, almost. And that is why we wanted to give him the opportunity about the inauguration lecture, but the topic was so exciting that we have also brought it up to our future lecture. And he was not alone here, but he has invited several very special speakers, and we have two guests from Oxford today, and these both guests will be here on the stage later. This is Professor Wilkinson from the Medical Ethics Oxford Center. Welcome to this Graham from the Oxford Internet Center, and he's also accompanied by his wife. Inside, first we will have the inauguration lecture given by Professor Kiener, and then we will have a lecture of Professor Wilkinson, and then we will have a panel discussion to discuss the both lectures together. So please prepare your questions. And for this panel, Dr. Graham will take the moderation. And I will tell you later why he's doing that, because he's much more qualified as I am in the moderation of such a big event. So, but our first speaker is Maximilian Kiener, and I would like to present him a little bit. So he is our junior professor in ethics and technology, and this is a professorship with a tenure track, so we do hope he stays with us for a long time, establishing this very important field and establishing the institute. And he has a very close relation with Oxford, right? We will have the guests from Oxford today. From 2015 to 2022, Professor Kiener has been to Oxford as a researcher, making his PhD and the postdoc study, and also now being our professor since 1 year. He's associate fellow at the Institute for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence in Oxford, and he has also several other roles there, so always in this connection space. And we are very happy that our new professors bring such important connections to us. So what is important today is not only listening to this lecture, but also to have small discussions, and afterwards, after we have finished the panel discussion, which is maybe a little bit formal in this plenum, we will have a possibility to ask more private or maybe very that and have some snack after that. So we are really looking forward for these contributions, and now we welcome Professor Kiener for this inauguration. Please.
Thanks very much for this very kind introduction. You are a very special audience to me. I want to thank the President and Vice President, not only for this opportunity tonight to present my ideas, but also for welcoming me so generously to this university. Your support has been extraordinary. Thank you so much. I want to thank my guests, Dominic, Peggy, and Andrew, who've known me since I was a graduate student and who've been mentors for me since then. Thanks so much for being here. It really means the world to me. I'm very happy to see so many of my colleagues here in the audience. Also some of my students, even though they won't get credit for this lecture. It's brilliant to see my team here as well. So good to have you. I think nothing can go wrong now with you here. And finally, I'm very happy to have my family here and want to thank them for their unwavering love and support. My parents are here, my sister and her family, and of course, my partner Antonia. So with so many friendly faces, I think all is set up for a fantastic evening, and I shall do my very best to live up to your expectation. So without further ado, let's go into the topic for the lecture tonight. Look into this man's face. What do you see? Concentration? Maybe even a bit of despair? It's March 2016, and the world watches Lee Sedol, a grandmaster of Go, an ancient board game symbolizing human strategic depth, a game that is incredibly complex. The possible configurations on the board exceed the number of atoms in the world. But today, Lee faces an opponent unlike any other. Today, he doesn't play against a human. He plays against an artificial intelligence. So Lee's nervous. As the event unfolds, Lee struggles, and the AI clinches victory in 4 out of 5 games. It's a testament to the complexities that AI is now able to master. It's a testament to the ability of AI to go into those areas that what we once thought were completely within the human domain. And there are other things that AI does, like driving cars, giving medical diagnoses, or hiring applicants. And what's so extraordinary is that AI doesn't just match human abilities, it surpasses them. So we are rushing into a future with an extremely powerful technology. So what does ethics have to do with that? So I'm an optimist. I think we stand to gain a lot from that development, both as individuals and as a society. But I'm also a realist. There are serious risks. An autonomous car can hit pedestrians. A surgical robot can paralyze patients. And algorithms can systematically discriminate or skew an entire democracy. So AI is like fire. It can cook your meal, but it can also burn down your house. My main claim for today is that ethics is key to how we could reap the benefits while also guard against the risks. And it's ethics that drives innovation, sustainable technological innovation, namely in the double sense of that word. The sense of being capable of being carried into the future, and then the sense of being worthy of being carried into the future. And I shall support that view on the basis of 2 more specific theses. And this is that ethics is deep, and that responsibility is strict. And in the course of the lecture tonight, I'll come back to these terms and explain in detail what I mean by them. To say that ethics is deep means that it's so deeply integrated into technology that we can't really have intelligent systems without some ethics settings. So basically it means that ethical capacities are a feature of artificial systems with intelligence and problem-solving abilities, and they can't be easily removed without also seriously impairing other aspects of their intelligence and problem-solving. So it's not just, ethics isn't just an afterthought or add-on. We can't just first develop technology and then say, we'll think about whether it's any good, ethically speaking. That won't work. So what I want to put forward here is that ethics isn't just integrated as a matter of fact. I also want to say more than it would be appropriate or nice to integrate it. I want to put forward the bolder claim that in fact it will inevitably integrate it. It will inevitably be part of developing intelligent systems. So we better get it right. The philosopher Peter Railton draws an interesting comparison to how we humans grow up. So think of the time when we were little children. We don't just grow up and are super logical, super rational, and then like adding a final piece to the puzzle, we suddenly learn about right and wrong. Our sense of ethics, like feeling for others, understanding their needs, being able to work together based on what we all think is fair, start shaping up right from when we were little kids. And actually, our smarts wouldn't make much sense without this ethical side. Take someone who doesn't get these ethical bits, maybe because of certain psychological disorders, maybe something like psychopathy. Research shows that, contrary to the common myth, they actually tend to struggle quite a lot with a whole range of things, what makes us smart, including problem solving. So this all goes to show that ethics isn't just a nice to have for being smart. It's absolutely core to it. So when I say ethics is steep, this is what I mean. To be intelligent, to be capable of powerful problem solving, ethics needs to be part of it right from the start. And now I want to talk about a particular example, one machine learning technique called reinforcement learning, to show how important ethics is when we try to make and produce intelligent systems. And to do that, I'm lucky to have a research assistant with me. So here he is. That's Sparky. And you might have seen him around the cafeteria here at TU Hamburg. And suppose you want to teach Sparky a new trick, like fetching a ball. When he does it well, you give him a treat. And the closer Sparky gets to performing the trick perfectly, the more treats he gets. Psychologists call this operant conditioning. And there's nothing unusual about this. We have known this type of learning principle for a long time. But the interesting point is that there has been a very fruitful relation between psychology and neuroscience on the one hand, and computer science on the other hand. So one could think what's true of Sparky is also true of this guy, Spooky. So think of Spooky as a representation symbol of some advanced technology for which reinforcement learning plays a role, some kind of artificial intelligence. Think of Spooky as like the technology behind driving a car, an autonomous car, a medical AI, or a hiring algorithm. Now imagine Spooky's starting to move around randomly in a particular environment, like an autonomous car simulation or something else. And whenever Spooky does something that we like, some kind of desired conduct, we give it a treat. And the closer Spooky gets to performing it perfectly, the more treats it gets. Now, I'm not saying that Spooky feels anything, enjoys eating a treat like Sparky did. It's just some kind of digital bonus, a digital reward that it is tasked to maximize. And so this way of training Spooky is very similar to how we taught Sparky. It's a process of giving treats to encourage certain behavior. And so this is reinforcement learning. It's the analog to operant conditioning in psychology. It's a type of machine learning within AI, where the agent also learns from trial and error, receiving rewards or penalties for its actions. And over time, Spooky will be able to identify which actions lead to the highest cumulative rewards, and then guide him to the optimal behavior or policy for accomplishing the task or maximizing those rewards. Now, the mathematics behind it is in reinforcement learning often comes down to these reward functions, and they are modeled with Markov decision processes. But I don't need to go into mathematical details now, and what I'll have to say will go beyond reinforcement learning. It'll also apply, for instance, to different activation functions in deep neural nets, like logistic function or rectifier linear unit, but also to the softmax function in the famous transformer architecture. But for now, let's focus on reinforcement learning. So let's think about how we can make Spooky intelligent. Let's think about how to determine the rewards that he gets for particular types of behavior. And I want to show you, by training Spooky, making him intelligent, ethics is there all the way. So look at that coordination system. So the horizontal axis is basically about risk levels. So think of an environment with different levels of risks. That could mean the risk of hurting someone, hitting someone with an autonomous car, giving a false diagnosis, or maybe something trivial like making a mistake in a game. So depending on the risk level, we could think about a function that tells us how much reward Spooky should get for playing it safe, for safety conduct, like slowing down if it's about a car, retreating, asking for human oversight. So what we're looking for is here a mathematical function that gives us the level of reward for safety-related behavior depending on the risk level of the situation. And one function that could come in quite handy is this one. It's called a modified logistic function, and don't worry, if you're not into math, it won't get worse than that, and I explain it in a moment. It's a nicely S-shaped curve, and it kind of makes sense at the beginning. You know, if there is no risk whatsoever, there's no reward for safety behavior. We want Spooky to go ahead and do something. If there's maximum risk, we want the reward for safety to be maximum as well, because we don't want to get people to get hurt or the Spooky to kind of mislearn the task. And in the middle, it's a continuous increase, so what the mathematicians will call monotonicity. Now this, and that's kind of the important point for me, is not just neutral numbers or math. It's also not just a technological necessity. It's an ethical choice all the way down. This is an ethical expression. So we shouldn't think when we interact with ChatGPT or other technologies that it has to be like that. There are different possibilities, and I want to pick out a couple of examples where the ethics lies. And it will be easier to see when I give you a reference point, a baseline. So a similar, simple linear function, which could be an alternative for the training of Spooky. Now, we have a convex art with our green line. That basically means it looks like a skateboard ramp at the beginning. Mathematicians would say, well, yeah, the first derivative is positive and the second one is also positive. That's kind of why it's that shape. But there's an ethics to it, and that is about utility and beneficence. You know, when the risks are very low, we want the AI to do good, to provide a healthcare benefit, to provide an educational benefit, to help us achieve something. We don't want it to be overcautious. And the principle of beneficence is a principle in philosophical ethics that describes our obligations to protect and promote other people's goods. And it's the principle of beneficence and our understanding of utility that speaks in favor of the green rather than the red line. So mathematically, there's a difference, but ethically, there's a huge difference as well. At the end, we have a concave ending. That means it looks more like an umbrella rather than a skateboard ramp. Can also have, you know, a mathematical explanation, also again about the second derivative of the function. But math doesn't really get to the core of it there. Again, there's an ethical reason why we might want to have a concave ending, and that is a precautionary principle. We don't want the AI or Spooky to wait right until the end, maximum risk, until it prioritizes safety over other things that it might want to achieve. We want to be better safe than sorry. So the end is an expression of the precautionary principle. And I think what we start to see is that the mathematical modeling in AI has these ethical components. So when we think about making it smart and intelligent, intelligent, these questions are there as well. Now, with these two things, we get another nice feature, and that is an adjustable inflection point. So the inflection point is that point where it's neither the skateboard ramp nor the umbrella, where it turns. Mathematically, there is a explanation again, but there's also an ethics to it. And the important bit is that we can shape that. So we can push it a bit to the left or a bit to the right. And that depends on the x0 that's highlighted in red. If you push it to the left, that means the integral of the function is greater. The emphasis on safety is greater than, let's say, efficiency. If you stick to the green line, this could imply the ethical judgment that safety is just as important as efficiency. But in some contexts, that's surely wrong. I mean, if you ask a car manufacturer, safety is in their DNA. And when we are in traffic, we think that safety is more important than efficiency. In other contexts, it might be we won't have efficiency. Maybe it's just about a game, and it doesn't really matter. So what we do with kind of adjusting that inflection point is we can think about context sensitivity of the system, different ways where different considerations play a role. Again, we think about safety and the relation to efficiency, but it's an important lever for fairness as well, because often the harms and benefits aren't equally distributed with the technology. So depending on how we adjust the safety profile, that might also have an implication for the overall fairness of that. And so we can continue and also control the steepness of that function with the parameter k in that. We can make it a bit steeper, a bit less steep. And this is basically the fine-tuning. So what I want to show with that is if we think about giving feedback to an AI system, having a reward function in this simplified version and reinforcement learning, the way we do it isn't just neutral, or it's a thing that could be done by one discipline only. We need those different perspectives to come together. It's a very bad idea to wait with ethics until the end of the product or an AI tool. You might have something that's jars with our constitutional values. You might have something that's not good for society, something that you can't have business success with because you won't be able to enter the market. So if you want to have continued success, you need to think about this. Ethics is not an add-on, it's deep. Ethics cannot be an afterthought. It needs to be deeply integrated. And this is the radical claim, the kind of a deepness in ethics that I wanted to put forward first. Ideally, we get integrity for our technology. The values are in the technology. But we can't just set it and forget it. Normally, it'd be a handful of people shaping that kind of thing. We might not have been involved in these kinds of developments. So we need to keep up a conversation as a society. Do we want that kind of large language model or another one? Do we want that kind of technology or another one? So what we need in addition to deep ethics is a moral concept that allows us to have that conversation in a meaningful way and keep that up. And that leads me to the second idea of the lecture, and that is that responsibility is strict. So that was the ethics by design, and I now move on to the second part, responsibility is strict. This is a combination of two ideas. One is about a type of responsibility, the second about a condition of responsibility. So when I talk about responsibility, I mean the literal sense, responding, answering, a type of answerability. So when someone is responsible, it's apt to ask them, why did you do this? And when they are responsible, they are liable to these kinds of requests for justification. When I talk about strictness, I mean that the conditions for being responsible in that way are lower than often assumed. Strictness is a term from the law. So many philosophers think there's quite a high bar for being answerable. It has to be connected to your quality of judgment, your will, or you have to have some degree of control. But strictness means you can have that obligation to answer and explain your conduct, even if the kind of connection is not very tight.
And this is exactly what we need in the context of new technologies, where there's so many people involved in the development and use in particular ways, and that we need in order to ask that question, why did you program or produce Spooky in that way? So responsibility is strict is that combination of an answerability dialogue, to have that conversation that gives us vigilance and oversight. The European Union AI Act stressed that effective human oversight is so key in Article 14, but we're still trying to figure out how to do that in practice or how to give that a theory foundation. So I suggest that responsibility in that version is really key. And there's another reason why we should think that responsibility is so important, because it is a real heavyweight concept in philosophy. It is the kind of bird's eye philosophy that we need to balance the general purpose technology that AI has become. It affects so many areas of our lives. So when we think about oversight, we also need to make sure that we have a concept that's equally weighty. And this is what I want to talk about now. So that will be more about philosophy. So I hope my engineering colleagues won't start checking their emails and phones. I hope I can make it enjoyable to you as well. So this is about the history of the philosophy of responsibility. And responsibility is an idea that's both incredibly old and distinctively new. It's old because the ideas associated with it have been on philosophers' minds since antiquity. So the ancient Stoics asked, well, how could it be the case that something is ever really up to us if everything's determined by antecedent causes, as Chrysippus writes? Aristotle develops a theory of voluntariness to outline what it is that we can be praised and blamed for, suggesting that can only be things that are not due to compulsion or ignorance. And Thomas Aquinas gives us blaming practices, accountability practices, one connected to what he calls fraternal correction, and another one connected to vengeful anger. And there are many more examples. At the same time, it's also a very new, I should say, a distinctively modern idea, because how we think about it has been shaped by three paradigm shifts, or many more, but I think three are important for me. And these three shifts are important because that shows that responsibility occupies strategic points that we need to have. So the first paradigm shift is the scientific revolution, work by 16th and 17th century Copernicus and Newton, that fundamentally changed our understanding of the natural world and the place of humans within it. Particular importance were the view called mechanistic determination. So the view that everything has a natural cause and causation happens through the contact of one body with another. Huge change in two respects. Mechanistic determination is about determination by natural causes, as opposed to the ancient providential determination, determination by divine fate. Second change, it abandoned the ancient and scholastic view of a teleology, the view that all objects in the world have an inner telos, purpose that they strive to fulfill. That didn't make sense anymore after the scientific revolution. So whatever caused an object, caused something, could no longer be understood as the force to the fulfillment of an inner purpose. Very different. So we use responsibility today as a way to understand our place in the world, in the way in which we are determined, including through technology. The second important change is a new distinction in modern times that the ancients didn't have in that way, and that is between ethics and morality. On a wide construal, ethics means everything in the normative domain. Question like, how can we lead a good life? And the what the Greeks call eudaimonia, how to have a happy life. But morality is much narrower. It's more like a system of conflict resolution. It's about what we owe each other, not so much about the pursuit of happiness. And political philosophers in particular, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, they had philosophies of conflict resolution, not about the pursuit of happiness. Immanuel Kant dethroned happiness as the supreme principle of morality and put obligation at the center. And even consequentialists like John Stuart Mill said that we won't call anything right or wrong unless we mean to imply there should be some kind of blame or punishment. Responsibility takes up, in a very unique way, the oscillation between those two dimensions. It takes up the obligation and morality part by thinking about what do we owe each other, also in the context of technology. What is it that the developer of Spooky owes to the end user, and maybe vice versa? But it also takes up questions about character assessment and virtue, particularly in Gary Watson's work. So what it is to have a good life, and we need to ask that question about technology as well. Does that make our lives better as individuals, as societies, or not? So a uniquely positioned concept for that question. A third change is the rise of liberal democracies in politics. In ancient times, it was unthinkable that a human could live outside a political community. So Aristotle said, you have to be either an animal or a beast. A beast or a god. But if you're a human, you have to be in a community. Now, for modern thinkers, that's not the case. Anarchy is a real possibility. And because the state has that coercive power, it needs to justify it. Responsibility is the framework for state-citizen relation. But it's not just about state responsibility. We also use responsibility when we think about individuals. There's this notable, rare agreement between Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher, when they both emphasized the responsibility of the individual to take charge of their life, to do something with it. So whenever you're unemployed, you shouldn't just say, well, the state ought to provide. It's your responsibility. So responsibility is the concept that allows us to figure out, or helps us to figure out, what it is that we can expect the individual to do, and what are more like structural problems, because unemployment isn't just an individual problem. And it's that concept about our politics societies that responsibility allows us to explore. So we have that idea as a conversation about technology with that kind of wide perspective. So it seems that responsibility is so uniquely positioned. It's like a prism where significant developments in science, politics, and society meet foundational research on free will, agency, and morality. It gives us that oversight and vigilance that we need for deep ethics. This is the combination, the two parts that we have to have. I'm coming to an end now. Just one more idea that I want to get across, and this is the connection between responsibility and sustainability. When we think about sustainability, it's basically the question, that goes a bit fast. Think about the question, how can we satisfy the interests that we have today, while also meeting those interests that will exist tomorrow? Three areas are particularly prominent. We think about the environment, of course. How can we use natural resources so that the planet will also be habitable tomorrow? We think about our business and economies and ask, how can we have economic success, but also prosperity tomorrow? But there is this third area, society, social sustainability. And that's the question, how can we have a good life now, but also have social cohesion, peace, and justice tomorrow? And we know that tech poses significant threats to that. It can polarize, it can exacerbate inequality, it can discriminate, and it can lead to injustice. Responsibility in this answerability sense is a natural remedy because it's based on a conversation based on equality rather than inequality. It is about conversation rather than polarization. And it is about respecting each other as moral equals rather than disrespect and discrimination. So when we think about sustainable technological development, it's that concept, that framework that allows us to pin down how we make it sustainable. Okay, so now I'm really coming to an end, and I think I need to. I had two parts for you today: deep ethics and strict responsibility. Deeply integrated, and responsibility needs to be strict to apply across the board and avoid what some people call a responsibility gap. I said that that gives us integrity and vigilance. So deep ethics is about integrity, putting the values into tech. And responsibility is about vigilance or oversight. And taken together, that empowers sustainability. Now, I want you to join me in looking at these ideas again, looking at them again and maybe seeing something new, something that we haven't seen before. And that is the claim for today, that it's ethics that drives technological innovation. It's not an afterthought, it's not an add-on. It's just my personal preference for acronyms. No, it's also not that. So my team had to suffer quite a lot from that. But this is what I wanted to put to your scrutiny and discussion later, that ethics is not the after thing, the add-on, but it is actually something that can really help us make progress. It's a catalyst, not a constraint. It's an enabler and not a restrictor. And on that note, Sparky and I thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Professor Kiener, for this very different lecture in comparison to the more technical lecture which we have. And I think this is something which can really drive us, at least for the next time, to thinking about this idea and maybe taking another perspective, what would be really great. And now I would like to introduce the second speaker, and I have forgotten my page, because now I'm more than happy to welcome Professor Dominic Wilkinson and the stage. Professor Wilkinson is a professor of medical ethics and director of medical ethics at Oxford Center for Practical Ethics. And he is also consultant neonatologist at John Radcliffe Hospital, and also a senior research fellow on the Jesus College in Oxford. So maybe to tell you a little bit about the CV of Professor Wilkinson, he was trained in medicine at the University of Melbourne and later specializing in the neonatal intensive care. So he has completed a master's degree in the University of Melbourne and in Monash University of Melbourne, and subsequently completed the Dr. Phil at the University of Oxford. And since that, he did not leave Oxford anymore. I would not also do that. And he has, since 2010, he was investigating ethical issues relating to neuroimaging and decision-making for critically ill newborn infants, which is for surely not a very easy task. And Professor Wilkinson is an author and co-author of several books with focus on medical ethics, law, and decision-making in these scenarios. And he works on new technologies on healthcare, including the AI in this region. And yes, he will present the part of this work today. And we're especially glad to have him here because he was Maximilian Kiener's doctoral supervisor at Oxford. So we want now to see at which level Professor Kiener is going to get. So please.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be invited. I'd like to thank the President, Vice President, and Max for inviting me to speak to you today. It's very exciting to be here for Max's inaugural lecture. It was an absolute pleasure to be involved in supervising Max. I take very little credit because really he didn't need much in the way of supervision at all. He was very self-motivated, and it's very exciting to see where his career is going. I work at a rather strange institute called the Uhiro Center, and I'll just tell you because I think it's interesting and relevant a little bit of the history. So Uhiro is a Japanese philanthropic foundation founded by a Japanese successful businessman who himself was a survivor of Hiroshima. And he chose to take the profits of his business and invest them in ethics and education in a center that's focused on practical ethics. And we understand practical ethics, the sort of mission that was given to us by the Uhiro Foundation, as about taking wisdom, philosophy, thinking to practical questions rather than very abstract theoretical questions, but also making philosophy relevant to practice. And it strikes me that the new center that Max is leading, stimulated by I think the visionary thinking of the president and the leaders of the Hamburg University of Technology, are really about that, about trying to think about how do we use philosophical insights to help us make important decisions about developments in technology. I'm going to move on from Max's excellent and outstanding overview of thinking about the relationship between ethics and technology to a very practical, interesting example that I think is on the frontier. But before I talk about that technology as it is now and will be soon, I'm going to zoom us even further ahead, several hundred years into the future. Some of you might have watched Star Trek Voyager in your childhood, like me. Star Trek Voyager was a starship that got famously adrift well beyond contact with the rest of known civilization. And in a disaster right at the beginning of the series, their doctor is killed. So they draw on their emergency medical hologram. They have an AI who's able to act as a doctor in an emergency for them. In the series, at least at the very start, their AI computer program is completely lacking in empathy and perhaps in the ethical touches of medicine. So it's an interesting thought experiment. But of course, what we're thinking about with some of these developments in AI is whether they might be able to be serving something like this emergency medical hologram. Could they replace a human doctor? If they did, what would we gain and what would we lose in the process? The idea of medical AI has been enticing investors and tech companies for several decades. So IBM's Watson program, Max talked about AlphaGo, but before AlphaGo was Deep Blue beating humans in 1997. Following that, IBM sought to develop Watson, which was going to beat humans at the great quiz show Jeopardy. And of course, more practically, because they weren't just interested in quiz shows, the idea was that Watson would be able to be used in medicine. Now, as a number of you may be aware, Watson, for a variety of reasons, really struggled to be able to beat humans in the way that AlphaGo is able to beat humans. But as we're all aware, in just the last couple of years, the technology has taken a very dramatic leap. The development of large language models suddenly looks like, across a whole range of areas, this technology might be able to do what people had been trying really hard to make the technology do for some time. And within medicine, within my area, it might be used for diagnostics, for therapeutics and decision-making. There's huge possibilities in terms of organization and administration. But there are some things that look to be just very easy and straightforward. And in many ways, they might seem just utterly technical without involving any ethical dimensions. So one of those elements is in the provision of information. And of course, we're all used to going to the internet and now, of course, going to ChatGPT or to one of the competitors when we want to find out recommendations on restaurants or how to get from A to B or what flight to catch. So what about information about a medical procedure? If you've ever had, I'm sure most of you will have had, medical procedures, whether that's a surgical procedure or something similar, you're likely to, hopefully, you gave informed consent. Informed consent we often think of as a single thing, but it's a process, and we could divide it into different stages. There's a first stage which involves a bit of a decision about different options. Are you going to have, one option might be a procedure, another option might be to wait and see if your symptoms get worse. If you've decided you're going to have a procedure, there's then a different phase where the doctor gives you a whole set of information about the procedure that you're about to have, and you then make a formal decision. You might sign on a piece of paper. you provide informed consent. Now, this bit of the procedure, as it stands in the UK, but also in Germany, as I understand it, often delegated to another member of the team. It's a mechanical process often. It has that element to it. It's a formality, needs to be gone through, so it might be given to somebody more junior than your consultant. And then on the day of the procedure itself, there's usually a fairly brief check-in with the proceduralist, with the surgeon, to see whether you're happy to go ahead. But the existing process, whereby perhaps a junior doctor or sometimes the surgeon themselves explains the procedure, is limited in a number of well understood ways. It's limited in terms of the time availability, the actual understanding, the ability of you to ask all the questions that you might wish to. So could we replace that with technology, with an AI? Could we replace this middle stage with consent GPT rather than chat GPT? This is something that we've been thinking about with one of my students over the last year or so. And in fact, what became clear to us once we started experimenting is that the existing systems, ChatGPT, which are not designed to do this at all, they were never programmed to do this. If you ask them this sort of question, say, talk to me as if I'm about to have a gastroscopy, a procedure to look inside my stomach, as if you're taking informed consent, they're very capable of, in very powerful ways, giving you the relevant information in ways that are often quite empathic and easy to understand. And if you ask it, it can do it in German too, or Swahili, or Polish, or Russian. They can make it more simple, it can make it more complicated. It can answer your questions. So this suddenly looks really rather attractive. But what about from an ethical point of view? Well, consent has ethical functions in two directions. Consent is an interaction, as it currently stands, between a person giving their permission and a person providing information. And it has ethical functions both for the patient to obtain all the information that they need to make a decision. Are they actually going to have the gastroscopy? And it has a function for the proceduralist, because in the absence of consent, doing the procedure is an assault. And legally, you're liable if you've failed to gain consent. And if there are complications and you haven't mentioned them, you're going to be sued. So it's got functions in both dimensions. Could AI help us with these ethical tasks? Well, there are obvious potential advantages from the patient in terms of, and I've highlighted some of these already, enhancing their understanding, giving you more time to ask as many questions as you like. You could have a link to an app. You could go back to it over days or weeks. You could talk about it with other friends, and they could ask questions too. Of course, that if the information's not accurate, and we're aware that some of our large language models are prone to make things up, then that's going to be a problem, though that is relatively easy to address from a technological point of view. It would lack some of the human touch, but as I've alluded already, often this phase of consent is treated in a fairly mechanical way, might be done in a very short space of time, so there might not be much that you'd lose in replacing it. From the doctor's point of view, one enormous attraction, and all of the surgeons I've talked to about this say, this sounds fantastic, when's it going to be available? Because it would save them time, and this tends to be their least favorite thing to do, because they mechanically have to do it. They then have to scroll down everything that they can think of that they mentioned, because if they fail to write it down and the patient says, you didn't tell me this, and it happens, they then become liable. But of course, this procedure, this could provide written transcripts. But then there are going to be challenges too for the health professionals, and there are questions about for the health system about how is this going to work? Is it going to be cost effective for this sort of process? So there are ethical questions, and as Max has alluded, although you folks are going to be expert in the technical dimensions, we're working with some technologists and health professionals in Singapore who are developing exactly this sort of system. We need to measure those sorts of dimensions, the accuracy of the information. We need to know how well people remember the information that they get from this. Do they use it? Do they just scroll to the bottom where it says tick, like some of you might have done with the consent forms that you get on the internet every day? So those technical questions, but we should think about the other more challenging ethical questions, like questions of responsibility, whether there is, this counts from the patient's point of view as giving permission in the right sort of way. This, as I've alluded, is one of the things that is on the horizon, very near on the horizon. But there are more radical possibilities in terms of this element of medicine, in terms of informed consent. One radical possibility is that this system might be so good that actually it becomes better than the current process, that nobody may go through the normal human process of consent because the chat GPT, the consent GPT is better. But one thing to point out with all of these technologies, and Max mentioned it already, is that they may not, even if they're better overall for both patients and professionals, there might be some people for whom it's worse and others for whom it's better. With many of these technological choices, the benefits and the burdens will be unevenly distributed. If you're somebody who finds technology overwhelming, who doesn't interact well with machine, who needs the human contact, you're going to be worse off if the consent conversations are replaced by a machine. More complicated is the possibility that the prior stage of consent would replace humans with an AI. That's where you're having a conversation. Should you have the gastroscopy? Should you wait longer? Should you have something else, some further investigation instead? In that domain, we've been thinking about some interesting possibilities, which is that elements of the human doctor-patient relationship that, again, we struggle with as human health professionals, we might be able to improve. So one of the things about the doctor-patient relationship that's been described for some time is how doctors provide information, how they seek input from patients. There's a spectrum from the doctor telling you what to do to the doctor simply giving you a set of options and you choosing, and a variety of possibilities in between. But actually, health professionals are not very good at tailoring their conversations to patients' needs. That's the sort of thing that we could, again, think about AI giving us more choices in terms of whether we want our doctor to be communicating to us in a deliberative mode or a paternalistic mode, because some of us simply want the doctor to tell us what we should do. So that's an intriguing possibility that I think is still ahead. There's some more tricky challenges. So how do we deal with consent in a situation where the patient is unconscious? Well, what we do currently is we might ask other family members and say, would your family member agree to a gastroscopy, or for the permanently unconscious patient, perhaps a feeding tube, or to go on a ventilator? One of the challenges as it currently stands is that there's reasonably good evidence that our surrogates, our family members, our loved ones, are actually not very good at predicting what we would answer. And so there's been some interest for a while in using statistical predictors. And you can use a variety of different pieces of information to predict what somebody would answer in response to these types of questions. And of course, improvements in big data may improve our ability to make those types of predictions. That, of course, raises interesting ethical questions about whether that's what we want in decision maker, whether we would want this sort of statistical information to be used. In a very recent paper with some colleagues, we've been looking at the possibility of combining statistical predictions with individualized information, for example, based on information that people have, their past interactions or information that they've written online. More broadly, and I'm going to wind up here, what I've done in this very brief talk is to outline some of the challenges and interesting ethical questions that come with this particular technology, this I've suggested soon to be available within medicine technology. The technology may replace humans or certain types of human interactions, and when it does, we might find that it's inferior, in which case obviously we shouldn't use it. We may find that it's superior, in which case it's likely to replace humans, and we're aware of that possibility in lots of areas where the technology may displace humans. But of course, where it becomes more difficult is where it's better in some ways and worse in others, or better for some people and worse in others. And in those situations, we have difficult ethical choices. The more challenging questions are where we find this technology can do things that we couldn't do before, where it, for example, can ventriloquize for the unconscious patient. And in those cases, we have to think afresh about how to deal with those, whether we wish to use them or how we wish to use them. Those are the difficult ethical questions that come with this sort of medical technology, but that also come with the sorts of technologies that you're developing, whether it's in climate science or in other applications of AI. We have these choices which, as Max has so powerfully argued, run deep in terms of values. They aren't reducible to things that we can necessarily to things that we can measure. And so we need to think carefully. And I think that this university and this center are in a perfect place to help us with that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Graham, for this input, also for the medical applications. We have visited today the Institute of Professor Morlock and has seen the medical applications in our Hamburg University of Technology, so this is also quite relevant to us. So after we have finished this lecturing round, now we are coming to a discussion.